Serious. Friends of sociopaths or psychopaths, what was your most uncomfortable moment with them? My mom had me when she was young and regularly told me that I ruined her life. She told me that if she had the money, she would have gotten rid of me. I remember from a very early age that my mom would just stand at the entrance to my room with a weapon. This didn't happen very often, maybe 2 to 3 times a year. One time when I was young, I finally asked her why she would do this. I'll never forget how she said this. She looked me straight in the eyes and said that I was a mistake and she was deciding if she should have done what she should have done a long time ago. I asked to move in with my grandma a week later. Thinking about how she said it still gets my heart racing. 22 years later. Don't know if I can accurately describe it, but every hair on my body stood straight up. I was paralyzed with fear and I felt like if I moved too suddenly, she would strike. Man, that's rough. Story 2. In high school, my boyfriend at the time and I shared a math class. It was well known we were dating, so I would always take his homework at the teacher's request if he missed it. He skipped a lot. I broke up with him over Christmas break. He cheated on me. The math teacher still assumed we were together, so he asked me to bring his homework. I did. I got to his house, waiting to drop it off at his doorstep. He told me to come in and explain it to him. He locked his bedroom door and started saying things like, "If I can't have you, then no one else can. I could get you back in a second, just admit it," etc. Then the true kicker, "If I end you or if you pass away, I would keep you." Disclaimer, I was never intimate with him and I think that irritated him. He then proceeded to try to be rough with me. He thought it was endearing and had no idea why I was so upset. I got out, I called my mom to pick me up and ran back to the school. I lived close. Terrifying. To this day, I'm still horrified by it and him. Last I heard, he was trying to be a magician. Looks like Charles Manson and is in and out of psych wards. Just to add, my ex hated animals. My dog passed away while we were dating and all he said was, "Good. I didn't like that dog or any dogs anyway." His emotions were all over the map too. He would cry in weird situations and it would always seem forced. I pretty much stayed with him for as long as I did because I was afraid of him. He was pretty cruel. Story 3. My cat recently had a litter. A relative of my husband said to my daughter, "Come here, little one, and show me which one you want to keep so I can get rid of the rest for your mama." My kid told him, "I'm keeping them all and you aren't allowed to pick them up." We lived in the backwoods, good old boy area. The intent was well recognized by the adults, but it still freaked out my daughter, who's now convinced that dude might do something to her if she thinks she's a baby too. Kids are so great with logic. She thought he didn't like the cats because they were little. These relatives all have this attitude towards animals. If a pet is sick or injured, you just eliminate it and throw it away. They've also been doing it to vermin for fun. I used to be horrified when I visited them, listening to the kids cheerfully talk about getting rid of animals. They would talk about what they did to the poor rabbits and squirrels just because they could. A cat, I think, would be different. A cat is a pet. You don't eliminate your pet because it has issues. They also had 2 dogs who harmed their newly bought goat. This goat was maybe going to be sold at some point, but instead of taking it as a loss, they got rid of the dogs that they had for years. These dogs were sweet and lovable, but also unsupervised. Honestly, their treatment of animals is a giant red flag for me. Story 4. He had a gas-powered pellet gun. It was one of my first times being baked. He also emptied a huge box of matches into the sink one time, and when we all told him not to, he called us wussies and lit it all on fire. It was a major pyro. I'm pretty sure he's in jail now. We'd hang out a lot in middle school, and every day I'd be worried I'd say something wrong and be punished with some unique torture, like the pellet gun thing and stuff related to my anxiety, like making me sing in front of his friends. I'm not a singer by any means, he just made me. We'd always play weird performance-related games like dance-offs or sing-offs, and whoever didn't want to participate, usually me, would always be punished in some way. Not to mention that everything I say is berated and never taken seriously. I know it sounds weird that I kept hanging out with him even after incidents like these, but it was really funny and kind of a wild card. It wasn't all bad. Plus, I was an only child and a year and a half younger, so I looked up to him like a brother. Well, that friend does seem like a psycho, but how metal was it to make that fire? Story 5. I've been longtime friends with a sociopath. He's honestly like my brother. We've developed this relationship wherein he treats me like his moral compass, but it doesn't always work. He's still manipulative and cruel at times, and he only truly cares about himself. But he tries to be a good person because he doesn't want to be an a-hole. This being said, my most uncomfortable moment with him would have to be when he was telling me about watching some guy almost leave this earth. He was telling me how he knew he should have stopped watching and helped him, but he was too interested in what the outcome would be if he didn't help. It was creepy to know that. As hard as he may try to be a decent person, sometimes he still can't help himself. Some people have asked me why I'm still friends with him, and honestly, it's because I care about him. I don't want any harm to come his way, and he knows that, so he trusts me, which is a huge thing for a sociopath. I don't judge him when he tells me about his dark, like super dark, thoughts, and I appreciate that he will always tell me the truth, even when I don't want to hear it. We both have horrible fathers, so it's nice to lament together. For him, our friendship is beneficial, and so we will remain friends. I know he will never care about me, and that's okay. Story 6. Contrary to what my son says, I believe he's a sociopath and possibly a psychopath as well. He can be cruel to the point of being a monster. Even though my son says he cares about others, I don't see it. He uses people and doesn't care when he throws them away. He was terrible to me, and I'm his mother. My son told me that I deserve to be homeless. I'm not. My son also threatened to eliminate me and said he should have done it a long time ago. He used me until I had nothing left for him to get, and then he pulled a weapon on me. That was the last straw, and I haven't seen him in several years. I raised him by myself, and my mother and sister lived close by, so my son was around them a lot. I don't know if my son was born to be the way he is or what. I'm not that way at all. If it's in the DNA, my son got it from his father. His dad is very manipulative and cunning, can be charming, and can be very cruel. The difference between my son and his father is that my son is much smarter, which is dangerous. Story 7. My ex would say, headlines, which meant I would be headlines in tomorrow's newspaper because he was going to end me. He once straight forcibly took me. I left in the middle of a fight to walk to work, and he jumped in his car, pulled up next to me, grabbed me, and threw me in the car. He drove like a maniac, swerving into traffic and super close to parked cars, telling me he was going to end us both. He made me call my work and tell them I wasn't coming in. I was sobbing hysterically, and I just played it off like I just found out a close friend had passed away. I don't remember how I talked myself out of that situation, but looking back, I can't believe how weak I was and just did what he said. He got arrested for handling me. Super embarrassing. I'm so glad I snapped out of that. I would never let anyone treat me like that way again. The weakness came from my staying with him afterward. He would cry in my lap and beg me to help him be a better man, and there were always promises of never doing it again, which of course were lies. When he did get arrested and the police were taking pictures of my roughed-up face and everyone was staring at me in the parking lot, I should have loved myself enough to get out. When the officer took pictures and collected evidence, a man my grandfather's age looked me in the eyes and told me I didn't deserve it and needed to get out. I should have never looked back. I'm ashamed to say I put up with a lot more before I finally walked away. I hate to say it, but I think it is a weakness. I also think people can find a strength in themselves they never imagined possible if they find a reason to see it in themselves. It doesn't define you in the long run unless you let it. Wow, I don't think I'll ever hear headlines without thinking of this now. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but some of these stories are straight up giving me the chills. They're just crazy. And if you want more of these videos, just hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Story 8. My sister is a sociopath. It took me a lot of years to realize this and stop rationalizing it. I'm diabetic and have been in comas. During the last one in 2015, after a year of no contact, she showed up at the hospital saying I had expressed to her that my wishes were not to resuscitate. About 12 of my friends shouted her down and I woke up 3 days later on my own. If I had coded during that time, however, there would have been a lot of gray area around if they were allowed to revive me. About 4 months later, she took out a life insurance policy on me and asked me to sign it. I said no, I no longer speak to her. I should add that I now have very clear wishes notarized and copies kept with my doctors and trusted friends. She's not taking me out that easily. Story 9. I'm friends with a legit psychopath. Not all psychopaths are necessarily a danger to society in the sense of physical violence, craziness, or unreasonableness. G is a close friend of mine. He's of shallow moral character, devious, manipulative, ready to screw anyone out of money, and capable of being physical when pressed. He's scary. That said, he's deeply intelligent, quick with a laugh and non-judging. You could talk to this guy about anything. He just doesn't care. He's a lot of fun to talk to or party with because he's so unique. I trust him to be himself. He's never screwed me over, except I seem to lose money when I went into business with him. The creepiest he's been, and he knows I feel this way, is when we talk about moralistic standards for society. Essentially, he thinks the weak and stupid should be weeded out, put on farms or something. He doesn't care about anyone else, save for a select few. He just thinks he's better than others based on his smarts, looks, and abilities. He feels the dumb should not be allowed to thrive. Creepy, huh? I remember one conversation we had when buzzed that I couldn't finish because we weren't getting anywhere with it. He won't change. He doesn't empathize. That said, he's a reasonable person. He's not going to put his darker, non-profiting thoughts into action. He's not interested. He likes money and doesn't mind ripping people off. A businessman. Cunning. He exists for profit. That said, he'd help me out of any kind of sticky situation, mostly for the fun of it. He's bored a lot, and he understands he needs others. He likes me because I'm interesting and he feels I'm on his level. We speak openly about his psychopathy because I'm so interested in it. We've been friends for 7 years and were close for 3 years before he moved to another city. I stayed at his house in 2016 for a couple of weeks. Story 10. I dated someone who I now believe is a sociopath. The most uncomfortable thing while we were dating was that he would constantly whisper things in my ear in public like, "Do you think I look hot right now? Or do you think I'm cool?" And the first few times I thought he was joking, so I laughed and he'd get angry. He wanted a serious answer. He wanted me to tell him how much I wanted to jump his bones right there in front of all our friends while they were watching and listening. I'd get lectured afterward like, you know you insulted me personally when you laughed at me in front of everyone. He could also cry on cue to get what he wanted, and as soon as he got what he wanted, it would instantly switch off and he'd turn very serious and tell me what a horrible person I was. The instant emotional switches are disarming. When he broke up with me, I went from being his favorite person in the world to instantly being at the very bottom of his list. He laughed when I cried on multiple occasions, calling me ridiculous. What's very alarming about people like him is how many people they can get on their side with their charm. None of his current friends know anything about his behavior behind closed doors. They're all new people. All the people who caught on when we were dating are gone from his life. He has convinced his new friends that I'm a psychopath because I tried to tell others what happened, so whenever I say anything about what a creep he is, I get brigaded by the new people who are now being manipulated. Also, he's completely emotionless until you interact with him, and then it's like he becomes animated. That dude reminds me of Dennis from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. What a nut job. Story 11. I have a friend who's a pathological liar. He's also mostly Scottish in heritage, northern Scotland, where the Viking influence is. He's 6'8", 350 pounds when he's watching his weight, 400 plus when he isn't, and there's a lot of muscle to go with everything else. The lies aren't all that awful most of the time. He's known as a very entertaining storyteller, and everyone knows he'll embellish greatly from time to time, but he can't keep a girlfriend. Apparently, he can't be honest and is a pathological cheater. The lies catch up with his relationships in a few weeks at most. One day we were in a taxi together and he got the idea that the driver was taking an unnecessarily long route. He stopped the cheerful story he was telling me mid-sentence. His face changed and he barked at the cab driver in a voice I'd never heard, loud, angry, and aggressive. The cab driver immediately pulled over and let us out without paying, and a good thing too. I think my friend was about to hurt him. I was petrified in my seat. I was terrified. It was the last time I spent time with him, though I'd known him for 20 years. I later learned that he won't associate with someone after they've seen him snap, as one of his other ex-friends put it. Story 12. I just about hurt my sociopath stepfather while doing the dishes. He'd been doing his thing, which was sitting behind me about 15 feet away and staring at me without saying anything for about 20 minutes while I cleaned up the kitchen after dinner. 20 minutes of staring. I was washing a knife and the hair on the back of my neck stood up and I realized he was right behind me. He was a big guy and I'm not sure how I did not hear him. I turned around with the knife and instinctively shoved it at him. He managed to suck in his gut and not get cut. I was saying over and over again, "Get away from me! Get away from me! Get away from me!" I didn't make a sound and went upstairs. I was young and that's when I knew one of us was going to go to jail if nothing changed. Story 13. Married one. The last straw was the day I caught his reflection as I passed by, and I saw pure evil and hatred in his eyes. I told him I was leaving the following week. He said, "If I ever see you somewhere with someone else, I won't say a word to you." I said, "Okay." He then added, "I'll just walk up to you and hit you." I was moving some things out and looked under the bed for a pair of shoes. I found his firearms, fully loaded and out of their cases, under his side of the bed. I went to the cops. Nothing came of it. Fast forward and he remarries before the ink is dry in the divorce. His new wife ends him in his sleep. She proceeds to end herself by using his pain pills. Yeah, I sleep better these days. Word from relatives was that she was a psycho as well, that he was getting ready to leave her, that she was stealing pain medicines from people, but I don't believe that at all. He was a monster. I guess some problems solve themselves. Story 14. My uncle. We found out about it in bits and pieces. My dad and he worked together. He got my dad fired by saying all sorts of lies to their boss, and then pretend to be the white knight by offering him a job in another country where he's living. Money was tight back then and we were in a lot of debt, so my dad agreed. He took him there, gave him work, but also made him a slave to his wife and kids, who also lived there. Dad was expected to cook food, wash the dishes, clean up the dining table after my uncle's family ate, and then eat himself. Dad didn't tell us until much later. According to the rules set by my uncle, he wasn't to contact us often, should mind his own business even if his daughter didn't turn up home all night, and should keep his mouth shut about work. Dad was miserable there, and we couldn't do much because, again, that job was a welcome relief to us. Uncle, meanwhile, would come every night to our home and have breakfast and dinner that my mom generously cooked because his family was abroad while complaining about my dad in front of us. One day I had finally reached my breaking point and I started crying because I felt horrible for my dad, who was trying so hard to make things right for us. My uncle just sat opposite me, smiling. Goddamn smiling. I will never forget that psycho grin on his face. Days later, Dad suddenly turned up unannounced at home. It turns out he'd been dumped by our uncle in our city without prior notice. Dad had no guts to tell us what happened. We realized Uncle was a psychopath later. He'd routinely mentally torture people and enjoy their misery while pretending to offer sympathy and help. He's in a powerful spot, so he offers his victims jobs. Once they accept, he makes them entirely dependent on him. He'd put his victims under even more psychological stress, be it by threatening to cut off ties or getting them fired if they disagreed with him. But Dad was messed up for days. He'd swing from utter despair to not speaking for days to extreme violence to being broken. I got roughed up a bit for trying to calm him down. Dad could finally regain his mental sanity after we cut off all ties to that uncle. Last we heard, he wanted to contact my dad because they're brothers and people realized what an awful person he was, so they avoided him too. Story 15. My sister feels nothing but rage. When she doesn't feel rage, she feels literally nothing. She spends her life manipulating everyone around her and satisfying that rage. She had been mercilessly cruel to me growing up. She tried to eliminate me 3 times before I moved out. No one believed me. Because I was older and larger, I was always considered the aggressor, even when I was being targeted in my sleep. Living with her was a nightmare. The most uncomfortable moment between us was something she did to me. It was something I considered doing to her. I'd been sent up to the crawl space to get an ornament. You could only access it from a ladder in the garage. When I grabbed it and turned around, she was at the top of the ladder, staring at me. There wasn't any room for her to come up. She was just waiting there, staring. She told me to get out of the way, and I told her I couldn't. There wasn't room for 2 people in the crawl space. She'd have to go back down the ladder. She immediately switched to rage. She said she hated me and she wasn't going to let me down from the crawl space. It was 110 degrees in there and I was already exhausted. I remember thinking, she's at the top of the ladder. Over a cement floor, I could make this stop. I'd just say it was an accident. As soon as I thought of that, her face suddenly went blank and she went back down the ladder. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. What's the most f***ed up human you've ever encountered? Story 4 is creepy. See you in that video.